A colossal structure described in antiquity may still lie buried beneath Egypt's sands. This is not the maze of the Minotaur from Greek myth, but something far more real and staggering, the lost labyrinth of Egypt. Ancient travelers wrote of a building so vast and complex it made the pyramids seem ordinary, a monument of 3,000 rooms built for pharaohs and gods. Yet today it has vanished almost completely from the earth. By the end of this journey, you will understand the compelling evidence that this wonder existed and the cutting-edge search to find its ruins. We will examine why a great pharaoh needed such an impenetrable complex and what secrets might be sealed in its legendary underground chambers. What does a civilization build when it wants its power to be remembered forever? Our foundational clue comes from a man who walked its halls himself, the Greek historian Herodotus. Visiting Egypt around 450 years before the Common Era, Herodotus was not just a chronicler of past events, he was a traveler in an ancient world, collecting stories and witnessing wonders firsthand. His account of the labyrinth is not a dry historical footnote, it is a report filled with genuine astonishment. He locates this impossible structure near a vast body of water called Lake Moeris in the region known as the Fayum. And his description is staggeringly specific. He tells us it was built as a grand funerary monument for 12 regional kings who ruled in a rare period of cooperation. But the numbers are what truly defy belief. Herodotus claims the labyrinth contained 3,000 rooms, not 100, not 500, but 3,000. He even breaks it down, saying 1,500 chambers were above ground and another 1,500 were duplicated below in a subterranean level. He describes courts and halls and endless colonnades arranged in such a bewildering, intricate pattern that to venture inside without a guide was to be utterly and hopelessly lost. The awe in his writing is palpable. He states plainly that the labyrinth surpassed all the mighty temples and monuments of Greece, that the pyramids were impressive, but this was a wonder of a different order entirely. This vivid testimony is our starting point, the spark for the entire mystery. Yet we must pause here and ask a critical question. Herodotus, often called the father of history, also had a reputation as a collector of tall tales. How much of this is a factual account from a reliable eyewitness, and how much is a traveler's tale, amplified by wonder and second-hand stories? To understand the labyrinth's reality, we must first understand the man who described it. What was his motivation in writing this down? Was he seeking to impress his Greek audience with tales of foreign grandeur? Or was he meticulously recording what Egyptian priests, the guardians of ancient knowledge, told him as he stood in the shadow of its walls? The answer lies not in dismissing his account, but in testing it against the landscape itself and the words of those who came after him. Herodotus was not the only ancient traveler left speechless by what he saw. Centuries later, another keen observer walked through the same ruins. The Greek geographer Strabo visited Egypt around 25 years before the Common Era, and his account provides a vital second witness. He confirms the labyrinth's location in the Fayum, near the city then called Crocodilopolis. His description is more architectural, noting it was built from a single, massive stone, a detail that speaks to an almost superhuman feat of engineering. He wrote of many adjoining chambers, their roofs also made of stone, and of columns arranged around a central space. Crucially, Strabo states that the villages nearby used the labyrinth as a kind of meeting hall, a communal center. This is not the description of a mythical fantasy. It is a report on a functioning, though crumbling, piece of civic infrastructure. It had a tangible place in the lives of ordinary people long after its builders were gone. Then, nearly a full century after Strabo, the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder compiled his vast encyclopedia of natural history. When he writes of the labyrinth, he treats it as a famous, established wonder of the world, but one so ancient its origins were already fading into legend. He repeats the staggering number of rooms and halls and adds a haunting detail that the doors were built to make a terrifying sound as they opened and closed, a feature perhaps designed to awe or intimidate any who entered. Think about this timeline. Herodotus saw it in the 5th century before the Common Era. Strabo walked its halls in the 1st century before the Common Era. Pliny wrote about it in the 1st century of the Common Era. That is a span of over 500 years where this structure is consistently documented by different men from different cultures, all pointing to the same region of Egypt. They were not copying each other, they were independent observers corroborating a persistent reality. This consistency is the bedrock of the historical argument. It transforms the labyrinth from a solitary traveler's tale into a documented landmark, a real place that stood for generations as a testament to a forgotten pharaoh's ambition. So if it was real and it was grand and it endured for centuries, a pressing new question emerges. Who had the power and the motive to build such an impossible thing? The classical writers gave us a name, but it is a name shrouded in its own mystery. The name those classical writers recorded was King Men's, but this is where history and translation create a puzzle. Egyptologists believe Men's is actually the Greek rendering of a powerful pharaoh from Egypt's Middle Kingdom, Amenemhat III. His reign, nearly 4,000 years ago, was a golden age of prosperity and architectural ambition. And his fingerprints are all over the very landscape the ancient travelers described. To find his labyrinth, we must first understand the world he reshaped, the Fayum oasis. This was not a random patch of desert. The Fayum is a vast, fertile depression west of the Nile, fed by a natural channel called the Bahr Yusuf. Before Amenemhat III, it was a seasonal marshland. Under his rule, it was transformed into the breadbasket of Egypt through one of antiquity's most ambitious engineering projects. He ordered the construction of massive dams, canals, and sluices to regulate the water from the Nile's annual flood, turning the unpredictable marsh into a stable, irrigated paradise. At the heart of this new agricultural empire was Lake Moeris, what we know today as Lake Karan. This enormous lake became the reservoir for the entire region, a symbol of the pharaoh's absolute control over the forces of nature. So why would a ruler who dedicated his life to taming a wilderness choose this very spot for his most mysterious monument? Think of the symbolism. The labyrinth was not built in the old capitals of Memphis or Thebes, the traditional seats of power lined with temples to familiar gods. It was built here in the center of his own personal creation, a monument to his dynasty's achievement, literally rising from the land he had conquered and cultivated. This location sent a clear message. The power of the pharaoh was not just spiritual or military, it was geological. He could redirect rivers, create lakes, and in the heart of it all, he could erect a house of mysteries so complex it defied human understanding. The Fayum was his masterpiece, and the labyrinth was to be its crown jewel, an administrative and religious center designed to awe and control. But the geography offers another, more practical clue. The Fayum is a closed basin surrounded by desert hills. It is a place one enters intentionally. A labyrinthine complex here would have been naturally isolated, easier to guard and control. If the stories of subterranean levels are true, the soft limestone bedrock of the region would have been perfect for tunneling. So we have a pharaoh with the means, a location with the right symbolism and geology, and multiple historical witnesses pointing to the same spot on the map. The search, then, seems straightforward. Go to the Fayum, look for the biggest pile of stones you can find. Yet when modern archaeologists first arrived at Lake Karan with the words of Herodotus and Strabo in hand, they found a landscape that told a different, more complicated story. The landscape around Lake Karan presented a puzzle of its own. Early explorers found scattered stone ruins and the remnants of massive foundations, but nothing that immediately screamed a building of 3,000 rooms. This led many to dismiss the ancient accounts as pure exaggeration. But what if the problem was not the description, but our modern expectation of what a labyrinth should be? To solve this, we must let go of the most famous labyrinth of all, the one from Greek myth. That story of the Minotaur trapped in a maze built by Daedalus has forever shaped our idea of a labyrinth as a confusing trap, a puzzle designed to lose and imprison. The Egyptian labyrinth was something entirely different. Its purpose was not to confuse but to consolidate. It was not a prison for a monster but a monument to an empire. Scholars analyzing the classical accounts alongside Egyptian beliefs see a structure of profound symbolic power. The sheer, overwhelming number of rooms and courts described by Herodotus and Strabo was likely not meant to be a disorienting maze in the literal sense. Instead, it was a physical manifestation of complexity itself. Think of it as the ultimate administrative capital. Each of Egypt's traditional provinces, called nomes, may have had its own dedicated chapel or hall within the complex, a place for their governors and priests to gather under the watchful eye of the pharaoh. This would have been a powerful tool of control, bringing the entire bureaucratic and religious machinery of the nation under one colossal roof, in the very region the pharaoh had personally cultivated. The labyrinth did not trap people, it organized them, weaving the diverse threads of the kingdom into a single, imposing tapestry of state power. At its heart, the labyrinth was almost certainly a grand temple. The Fayum was the cult center of Sobek, the powerful crocodile god of the Nile's waters and fertility. A massive temple to Sobek at the center of this water management project makes perfect sense, a divine thank you for the bounty the pharaoh's engineering had secured. So this complex served a dual purpose, both earthly and divine. It was a place where provincial taxes could be calculated and stored, where decrees were issued, and where, in the next courtyard, priests performed rituals to ensure the continued flood of the Nile. Its labyrinthine design, then, was a mirror. It reflected the intricate, interlocking bureaucracy of the Egyptian state on one level, and on a higher level, it symbolized the complex, orderly cosmos the Egyptians believed their rituals maintained. Walking through its endless colonnades would have been a profound experience, a journey through the very architecture of creation and kingship. This understanding transforms the ruins from a potential wild goose chase into a search for something very specific, a central administrative temple complex of unprecedented scale. But if it was so grand and so important, why is it not a famous tourist site today? Why did it vanish? The answer lies not in myth, but in a very practical and relentless force that has reshaped Egypt for millennia. To understand the scale of his vision, we must meet the man himself, Amenemhat III. His reign, spanning over 45 years in the 19th century before the Common Era, was not merely long, it was transformative. Egypt under his rule reached a zenith of stability and wealth, a golden age built on more than just military conquest. It was built on water. His true obsession was the Fayum, and his legacy there was one of profound, literal earth moving. While other pharaohs left pyramids pointing to the stars, Amenemhat III looked to the ground and reshaped it. His teams of engineers constructed vast dikes and canals, taming the wild floods of the Nile to feed the great lake Moeris, turning a marsh into an agricultural engine that could feed cities. This was a pharaoh who thought in terms of systems and control, who sought to harness the chaos of nature itself for the benefit of his state. So what does a ruler who has already redirected rivers and created lakes do for his final, defining monument? He builds a labyrinth. For Amenemhat III, this was not a whimsical project. It was the ultimate expression of his philosophy. A single, overwhelming complex in the heart of his engineered paradise served multiple, brilliant purposes. First, it centralized power. By placing a grand administrative and religious capital here, far from the traditional power centers, he forced the entire machinery of government to revolve around his personal achievement. Provincial governors and priests would have to journey to his Fayum, to be processed through the labyrinth's countless courts, physically enacting their submission to his centralized authority. Second, it venerated the local gods, particularly Sobek, the crocodile deity of the Nile's life-giving waters. A labyrinth with a massive temple at its core was a divine thank you note, a way to ensure the gods blessed the very hydrological system he had built. It linked his earthly power directly to cosmic favor, but perhaps most importantly, it was about legacy. Pyramids were tombs sealed and hidden. A labyrinth was a living, functioning monument. It was designed not to be entered once and sealed, but to be used to be walked, to inspire awe and confusion for generations. It was a statement carved in stone and bureaucracy. I built this. I ordered this complexity. My will is made manifest in every corridor and column. The labyrinth was the crown jewel of his building programs, a perfect fusion of practical governance, religious devotion, and immortal vanity. It was meant to be an eternal engine of his memory, operating long after his body was laid to rest. And to ensure that memory endured, he may have taken one final, astonishing step, linking his labyrinth to another, even more secret project deep in the desert. The quest to find the labyrinth moved from ancient texts into the gritty reality of the desert in the 19th century. As Egyptology transformed from treasure hunting into a science, systematic explorers arrived with shovels and a burning question: where was the proof? Among the first was the German scholar Carl Richard Lepsius. Leading a Prussian expedition in the 1840s, he meticulously surveyed the Fayum region around Lake Moeris. He documented ruins, mapped the land, and collected artifacts, but the colossal, intact labyrinth Herodotus described remained elusive. The scale he was looking for simply wasn't there in plain sight. This only deepened the mystery. Had the ancient writers exaggerated, or was the truth buried deeper than anyone had thought? The answer began to emerge from a most unglamorous substance, a mountain of rubble. The most compelling early claim came from the relentless British archaeologist Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie. In the 1880s, Petrie, a man known for his almost obsessive attention to detail, turned his focus to Hawara. This was the site of Amenemhat III's second pyramid, a mud-brick structure that had largely melted back into the earth. Just to the south of this pyramid, Petrie made a startling discovery. He didn't find towering walls or ornate columns. Instead, he uncovered what he called a great plain of chips, a sprawling foundation platform made entirely of crushed limestone fragments. This artificial plateau covered an area so vast it was measured in acres. To Petrie's trained eye, this was not a natural formation. This was the deliberate, leveled base upon which something unimaginably large had once stood. The chips were the debris from quarrying and shaping the very stones of the labyrinth itself. He wrote with conviction that this was the foundation of the legendary structure, the literal ground floor of the mystery. While he found no standing architecture, no labyrinthine walls to walk between, this barren plain of stone felt like a ghost imprint. It was the first modern, physical evidence that something of staggering scale had indeed existed at the very location the classical sources and the pharaoh's history pointed to. Petrie stood on that plain of chips and saw not an empty field but the shadow of a wonder. Yet a shadow was all it was, without walls, without a clear floor plan. The labyrinth's true form and fate remained locked away. If this was its foundation, where did all the stones go? The answer to that question would require looking not for a building, but for its absence, and understanding the relentless economy of an ancient landscape. Flinders Petrie stood on that desolate plain at Hawara and saw a mathematical truth in the rubble. His meticulous surveys revealed an artificial platform of staggering dimensions, a rectangle of compacted gypsum and limestone chips measuring roughly 304 meters by 244 meters. To put that in perspective, that foundation was larger than 10 football fields laid side by side. This was not a natural feature. This was the deliberate, engineered base for a structure of almost inconceivable scale. Petrie, in his typically methodical way, mapped every inch, sketched the layout, and filled his notebooks with observations that mixed scientific rigor with a palpable sense of awe. He wrote of the sheer labor it represented, the millions of tons of stone fragments that had been brought in and leveled to create a perfectly flat stage in the Egyptian desert. For him, this barren expanse was the ghost of the labyrinth, its skeletal footprint pressed into the earth. But where was the body, the towering walls and endless colonnades? Petrie developed a theory as practical as the Egyptians themselves. He proposed that the magnificent stone walls of the labyrinth did not vanish into myth, they were dismantled block by block for reuse. In later centuries, perhaps by the Romans or even early Islamic builders, the complex became the ultimate quarry. Why travel miles to cut new stone when a mountain of perfectly good pre-cut limestone sat here, already shaped and ready to be hauled away? The labyrinth, in a cruel twist of fate, may have been cannibalized to build the cities that grew over its memory. His personal notes convey a fascinating duality, the excitement of a detective who has found the scene of the crime, mixed with the profound frustration of an archaeologist who arrives centuries too late. He had the blueprint in the ground, but the masterpiece was gone. This plain of stone, however, is far from meaningless. It is a negative space that defines a presence. Like finding the concrete foundation of a demolished skyscraper, its vast outline tells you something undeniable, something colossal was here. It confirms the central claim of the ancient sources that a building of impossible size once dominated this landscape. Petrie's work transformed the labyrinth from a debated story into an archaeological fact, a monument that left a wound in the earth as its only testament. But if all that remains is a field of chips, how can we ever hope to understand what the labyrinth truly was, or what secrets it might still guard beneath that rubble? The plain of chips at Hawara is a ghostly foundation, but perhaps the labyrinth was never just one building. While Petrie mapped the rubble, another compelling theory was taking shape just a few miles to the north at a place called Fayum. Here, the desert holds a different kind of clue, not a field of fragments, but the remains of immense purpose. Two gigantic stone pedestals rise from the sands, platforms so large they look like the foundations of small hills. These are not natural formations, they are the bases for what were once two towering statues of Pharaoh Amenemhat III, seated colossi that would have gazed out across his engineered Fayum. Herodotus himself mentions these statues, noting they were of such immense height that even the pyramids seemed less impressive from their vantage. For some archaeologists, these colossi are not isolated monuments. They are pieces of a larger puzzle. Could these statues have been the grand sentinels of the labyrinth complex? Imagine approaching a ceremonial way, a processional road lined with sphinxes or pillars, leading toward those two imposing figures of the pharaoh. Beyond them, the labyrinth itself would have risen, a maze of courts and columns stretching toward the horizon. This theory suggests the labyrinth was not a single, monolithic building as we might picture a palace. Instead, it was a sprawling ritual landscape, a network of temples, administrative quarters, statues, and causeways, all integrated into one overwhelming display of power. The colossi at Fayum, then, were the gateway. They framed the entrance to the pharaoh's domain, both physically and symbolically. Anyone approaching, from a humble farmer to a visiting dignitary, would have had to pass under the stone gaze of Amenemhat III twice over, a crushing reminder of who ruled this land and the waters that fed it. This idea transforms our search from looking for one huge footprint to looking for a constellation of sites connected by ancient roads and sightlines. The labyrinth becomes less a building and more of a precinct, a sacred district where every element, from the tallest statue to the smallest shrine, was part of a carefully choreographed experience of awe. If this is true, then the plain of chips at Hawara might be just the administrative and temple core, the beating heart of a complex that spread for miles. But if the complex was so vast and its stone was so valuable, what possible hope is there of finding anything of substance left? The answer may lie not in looking for what remains above the sand, but in listening for what whispers from beneath it. For decades, the ghostly plain of chips at Hawara was the only physical clue, a silent testament written in rubble. Then, in 2008, technology offered a way to listen to what that rubble was hiding. A joint Egyptian and international scientific team arrived at the site not with shovels, but with sophisticated ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry equipment. These tools act like X-ray vision for archaeologists, sending signals into the earth and reading the echoes to map differences in soil density and magnetic properties. They can reveal the outlines of buried walls, foundations, and voids without moving a single grain of sand. The team methodically scanned the area south of Amenemhat III's pyramid, covering the very region where Petrie had mapped his vast foundation. For 3 field seasons, they collected data, a digital whisper from deep below the desert. When they processed the results and published their findings in 2011, the report sent a shockwave through the world of Egyptology. The scans appeared to show something extraordinary. Beneath the unremarkable surface, the data revealed the ghostly imprint of a massive, grid-like structure. The images suggested a labyrinth in the most literal sense, a dense network of rectilinear walls forming what looked like countless rooms arranged in a tight, repeating pattern. The underground complex seemed to sprawl for acres, a hidden city of stone sleeping beneath the sand. This was not just a few scattered foundations, it was a precise architectural blueprint revealed from below. The immediate and electrifying conclusion was that this had to be it, the fabled subterranean level of the labyrinth that Herodotus described with such awe 2,500 years earlier. The ancient historian's claim of 1,500 underground chambers no longer seemed like a fanciful exaggeration, but a plausible description of a staggering archaeological reality. The news sparked a wave of excitement. Headlines around the world declared the lost labyrinth found. For a moment, it seemed the mystery was solved, that technology had triumphed where centuries of digging had failed. The abstract lines on a radar screen felt like a direct window into the past, a perfect match for the ancient texts. Yet in archaeology, as in any science, initial excitement must always meet the rigorous test of scrutiny. The data was compelling, but what exactly were these lines on the screen representing? The radar images promised a revolution, but science demands more than just a compelling picture. As the initial headlines faded, a wave of sober skepticism swept through the academic community. Leading Egyptologists and geophysicists began to scrutinize the data, and their questions cut to the very heart of the discovery. The most significant critique focused on the nature of the underground patterns themselves. Could the neat, grid-like lines be something other than pharaonic walls? Skeptics proposed a far more mundane explanation, that the scans were actually picking up the remains of much later settlements from the Ptolemaic or Roman periods, built over 1,000 years after Amenemhat III. These later communities often constructed networks of mud brick walls and irrigation channels that, from a radar's perspective, could easily resemble a labyrinthine grid. The team's report itself noted the presence of pottery shards from these later eras on the surface, adding fuel to this alternative theory. Other experts pointed to the geology. The Fayum region is a basin of sedimentary layers, limestone and clay deposited over eons. Natural fractures in the bedrock or the compacted remains of ancient river channels can sometimes produce strikingly regular linear signatures that trick the untrained eye. This controversy is a classic and necessary tension in archaeology, especially when technology peers into the unseen. It is the danger of pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar patterns in random data, like seeing a face in the clouds. Everyone wanted to find the labyrinth, and the radar gave us a pattern that fit our deepest hopes. But wanting something to be true is not the same as proof. The debate highlighted the critical, often underappreciated challenge of archaeological geophysics. The tools are extraordinarily powerful, but they do not provide a photograph. They provide a dataset, a collection of echoes and magnetic readings that require expert interpretation. Reading those signals is as much an art as a science, requiring a deep understanding of local geology, soil conditions, and the full history of human activity at a site. A straight line on a screen could be a pharaonic wall, a Roman drainage ditch, or a crack in the bedrock. Without excavation, a trowel carefully brushing away the sand to touch the actual structure, the data remains a tantalizing, ambiguous clue. This does not mean the radar findings are worthless, far from it. It means they are a beginning, not an end. They tell us unequivocally that there is something significant buried at Hawara, a complex and extensive subsurface anomaly that demands further investigation. The controversy reframes the question from, is it the labyrinth, to what exactly is down there? The answer will only come from the slow, meticulous work of digging, of connecting the digital ghost in the machine to the physical reality of stone and mortar. The debate over the radar images forces us back to the original sources with a sharper question. If we strip away the legend and focus solely on the archaeology, what materials would such a complex have been built from? The answer lies in the very stones of Egypt itself. Herodotus described the labyrinth as a structure of gleaming white stone, and this simple detail is one of his most reliable clues. The primary building material of the Middle Kingdom, especially for monumental architecture in the Fayum region, was limestone. This stone, quarried from the nearby cliffs, is relatively soft when first extracted, allowing craftsmen to carve it with incredible precision. Once exposed to the harsh Egyptian sun, it hardens and takes on a brilliant, almost luminous white appearance. For a pharaoh like Amenemhat III, constructing his grand administrative capital from local limestone was both practical and symbolic. It rooted his monument in the very land he had transformed, a crown of white stone rising from the desert he had made fertile. But for key elements, the doorways, the thresholds, the statues of gods, and the pharaoh himself, something harder and more imposing would have been used. Granite, hauled with immense effort from quarries far to the south near Aswan, was the stone of eternity for the Egyptians. Its incredible durability and stark, polished beauty made it the material for the most sacred and important features. Imagine entering a courtyard of blinding white limestone, your footsteps echoing in the heat, only to pass through a towering gateway framed in polished red or black granite. The contrast would have been deliberate and awe-inspiring, a sensory signal that you are moving from one realm into another. To visualize the lost labyrinth, we must look to the temples that did survive from Amenemhat III's reign. A crucial parallel exists just south of the Fayum at a site called Amenemhat III. Here, the pharaoh built a temple dedicated to the harvest goddess Renenutet and the crocodile god Sobek. Though far smaller than the legendary labyrinth, its architecture provides a direct blueprint for his style. The temple features a classic layout, a processional way leading through a columned hall and into inner sanctuaries. The columns themselves are sturdy and fluted, designed for strength and grandeur. The walls would have been covered from floor to ceiling in raised relief carvings, depicting the pharaoh making offerings to the gods, scenes of agricultural bounty from the Fayum, and intricate hieroglyphic texts proclaiming his deeds. This is the aesthetic language Amenemhat III spoke in stone. Now amplify Amenemhat III 100-fold. Envision not one columned hall, but dozens arranged in a seemingly endless sequence. Picture courtyards opening onto more courtyards, each framed by massive limestone pylons sloping inward, their surfaces alive with colossal images of the pharaoh smiting Egypt's enemies or receiving the blessing of the gods. The sun would have created a dramatic play of light and shadow, with bright, open spaces suddenly giving way to the cool, dim silence of covered colonnades, the air smelling of dust, incense, and stone. This overwhelming scale was not an accident of vanity. It was a precise psychological and theological tool. In Egyptian belief, the temple was not just a house for a god, it was a model of the universe at the moment of creation. Its floor represented the primordial marsh, its columns were the lotus and papyrus plants that first emerged, its ceiling was the star-filled sky. A labyrinth of 3,000 rooms would have been the ultimate expression of this cosmic order, a universe in miniature so vast and complex it could only be navigated by the initiated, by the priests and the pharaoh who served as its stewards. On a human level, the design served a parallel purpose. Just as the cosmos was an intricate hierarchy of gods and forces, the Egyptian state was an intricate hierarchy of officials, priests, and laborers. The labyrinth's countless administrative chambers physically embodied this bureaucratic maze. A provincial governor bringing tribute would have been led through a carefully choreographed journey, from outer public courts through increasingly restricted spaces, each step reinforcing his place in the pecking order, culminating in an audience in a hall that felt like the center of the world. The architecture itself was the mechanism of control, impressing upon every visitor that the state was as vast, ordered, and inscrutable as the cosmos. It was power made manifest in geometry and stone, but to truly secure his legacy, a pharaoh needed more than a monument to visit, he needed one to be buried within. The labyrinth's greatest secret may not have been its halls above ground, but what it was designed to conceal far below the sand. The true power of Amenemhat III's labyrinth may have flowed not from its endless corridors, but from a dark, primordial force worshipped in its deepest chambers. To walk its halls was to enter the domain of Sobek, the crocodile god. This was not a gentle deity. Sobek represented the untamed, dangerous power of the Nile itself, the sudden flood that could bring life or bring devastating destruction. In the ecology of the Fayum, a region literally created by controlled water, the crocodile was the perfect symbol. It was the apex predator of the marshes, a creature of immense strength that could vanish beneath the murky water only to erupt with terrifying speed. By championing Sobek's cult and building his labyrinth here, Amenemhat III was performing a masterstroke of political theology. He was not conquering the chaotic force of nature, he was domesticating it, placing himself as the intermediary between the people and the god's raw power. He even took the god's name, calling himself Amenemhat Sobek. Amenemhat Sobek is satisfied. The labyrinth, therefore, was more than an administrative hub. It was the national nerve center for the worship of this fearsome deity. Within its walls, rituals unfolded that would seem bizarre to us today, but were deadly serious to the ancient Egyptians. The complex almost certainly contained sacred pools, elaborate tanks where live crocodiles were kept. These were not ordinary animals, they were seen as living manifestations of Sobek himself. They would have been pampered and fed choice cuts of meat, adorned with gold earrings and jeweled bracelets. Priests dedicated to their care would have known each crocodile by name, treating them with a mixture of meticulous reverence and palpable fear. When one of these sacred creatures died, it was not discarded. It was given a full mummification ritual, wrapped in fine linen, and buried in a dedicated cemetery with all the rites afforded to a noble. The labyrinth would have been the factory for this entire process, a place echoing with the sounds of splashing water, low chants, and the unsettling, deep bellow of the crocodiles. The air would have carried a complex scent, incense masking the musky, reptilian odor of the pools and the sharp, clean smell of the embalming workshops. For an Egyptian pilgrim, a journey to the labyrinth was a confrontation with divine terror made manageable. You would not come to ask Sobek for a good harvest directly, that would be far too risky. Instead, you came to the priests who served in the labyrinth, who knew the rituals and incantations to appease the god's volatile temper. You might bring an offering, a small statue of a crocodile, a piece of gold jewelry for the sacred animal, hoping the priests could intercede on your behalf to turn Sobek's destructive power into protective blessing for your family or your fields. This system gave the pharaoh and his priesthood immense, centralized control. By making the labyrinth the sole place where Sobek could be properly worshipped at this scale, Amenemhat III ensured that anyone seeking the god's favor had to navigate his monument, contribute to its economy, and acknowledge his supreme authority as Sobek's chief priest on earth. The fear of the crocodile god was channeled directly into support for the state. This divine role provides the clearest answer yet to the labyrinth's ultimate purpose. It was a machine for converting raw, chaotic power, both natural and political, into a stable, controlled order. The endless administrative rooms managed the grain and wealth that the Fayum's waters produced. The towering temples and sacred crocodile pools managed the spiritual forces that governed those very waters. Every aspect was interlocked, a perfect closed system. The pharaoh who redirected rivers also redirected faith, building a monument so vast and complex that it became the only possible container for the terrifying, magnificent power it was designed to honor. But if the labyrinth was the beating heart of this cult, where did its influence truly end? The answer may lie in the silent, sun-baked desert far from the water's edge, in a place where the pharaoh sought a different kind of eternity. Herodotus's claim of 1,500 underground rooms forces us to look down into the earth itself. This is the labyrinth's deepest mystery, a hidden dimension beneath the sprawling administrative halls and sacred pools. What possible purpose could such an immense subterranean level serve? The answer lies not in a single function, but in a layered one, reflecting the Egyptian mind that saw no separation between the practical, the sacred, and the eternal. First, consider the most straightforward possibility: storage. The Fayum was the granary of Egypt, and the labyrinth was its administrative heart. Those underground chambers could have been colossal, climate-controlled silos for the kingdom's grain reserves, a national bank of food security carved into the cool limestone. But grain was just one form of wealth. Other vaults might have held the ritual treasures of the Sobek cult, golden statues, ceremonial regalia, and the tribute brought from every province. This transforms the labyrinth from a monument into a functioning fortress of economy, its true wealth and power literally buried and protected. Yet the Egyptians did not just bury treasure, they buried their dead with profound ritual purpose. This leads to the second, and perhaps most likely primary function, a necropolis. We know from other sites that the cult of Sobek maintained extensive cemeteries for its sacred crocodiles. The labyrinth's underground level would be the ultimate expression of this practice, a vast, organized catacomb for hundreds, perhaps thousands, of mummified crocodiles, each interred as an incarnation of the god. But it wouldn't stop there. High priests of the cult, temple officials, and maybe even members of the royal family associated with the Fayum project could have been granted the ultimate honor, burial within the sacred maze itself. Imagine endless corridors lined with niche after niche, each containing a linen-wrapped form, be it reptile or human, resting in the silent, perpetual dark. This would make the underground labyrinth a city of the dead, mirroring the bustling city of the living above. This mirroring touches on the third, most profound layer, symbolism. In Egyptian cosmology, the underworld was not just a place of death, but a realm of regeneration where the sun god traveled each night to be reborn at dawn. A ritual space designed to replicate that journey would be the ultimate religious tool. Certain sealed chambers deep within the complex could have been used for initiation rites or sacred dramas, where priests reenacted the mythic battles and trials of the underworld. Passing through the labyrinth's dark, confusing passages could have been a physical ordeal meant to symbolize the soul's journey, emerging into the sun-lit courtyard above representing rebirth and eternal life. The terrifying sound of the doors that Pliny mentioned would fit perfectly here, a manufactured awe in a carefully staged spiritual experience. Is there any archaeological precedent for such an immense underground complex? Absolutely. While nothing on the scale of 1,500 rooms has been found, the concept is deeply Egyptian. The step pyramid complex of Djoser at Saqqara includes a staggering 3.5 miles of underground tunnels, galleries, and storage magazines. The builders of the labyrinth would have been heirs to this millennia-old tradition of subterranean engineering. They simply may have taken that existing architectural principle and scaled it up to a mind-bending degree, turning what was a royal tomb complex into a subterranean city for a god and his servants. So what then might still remain in those chambers if they exist? The practical answer is perhaps less gold than we might dream, but something far more telling to an archaeologist. The stone walls themselves, if ever exposed, would likely be bare, any precious linens or wooden artifacts long since turned to dust in the damp earth. But the durable evidence would be staggering. Thousands of crocodile mummies in their pottery coffins, intricate canopic jars that held priestly organs, fragments of inscribed papyrus detailing temple accounts, and the undisturbed burial assemblages of the labyrinth's elite guardians. These objects would not glitter, but they would speak, providing an unprecedented census of a powerful cult's operation, economy, and belief system across centuries. They would be the silent, preserved record of the labyrinth's true purpose, waiting in the dark. This leads to a final, unsettling possibility. If the labyrinth was designed as a perfect, sealed system of power in life and in death, what if its greatest secret was meant to stay hidden forever, not by accident, but by the precise and terrifying intention of its builder? The gleaming white labyrinth and the dark pyramid were not separate monuments, but two halves of a single, inseparable design. Rising from the desert just south of the Plain of Chips stands Amenemhat III's final resting place, his pyramid at Hawara. Today, it is a weathered, crumbling mass, its core of dark mud brick exposed to the sun, earning it the modern nickname, the Black Pyramid. But in its prime, it was a mirror to the labyrinth itself, sheathed in the same brilliant white Chora limestone. This proximity is no accident. In the Egyptian conception of the afterlife, these structures served interlocking, eternal purposes. The pyramid was the sealed vessel for the pharaoh's physical body and his spirit, the place of his transformation into an eternal god. But a god required service, offerings, and a place for his living presence to be honored. That was the role of the mortuary temple, and the labyrinth, with its countless halls and altars, was almost certainly designed to be the most magnificent one ever built. A long, covered causeway, a sacred road shielded from the profane world, would have connected the two. This was the final processional journey. After the pharaoh's body was mummified in the labyrinth's specialized workshops, his funeral cortege would have moved through the labyrinth's courts, past the sacred pools of Sobek, and out along that causeway to the pyramid for burial. But the connection did not end at the funeral. For centuries after, priests employed by the royal endowment would have lived and worked within the labyrinth's administrative quarters. Each day, in a specific temple chamber dedicated to the pharaoh's cult, they would perform the opening of the mouth ritual before a statue of Amenemhat III, magically animating it so his spirit could receive offerings of food, drink, and incense. The labyrinth was the eternal engine for this worship. The grain stored in its subterranean magazines funded the priesthood. The bureaucracy housed in its endless rooms managed the vast estates deeded to support the cult. This transforms our understanding of the labyrinth's scale. It was not merely an oversized temple. It was a perpetual motion machine for immortality, a factory designed to manufacture and sustain a pharaoh's divine status forever. The sheer size of the administrative complex makes sense only when you see it as the headquarters for a permanent, state-funded operation to maintain not just a temple, but a royal soul for eternity. This grand funerary landscape, labyrinth, causeway, pyramid was the ultimate statement of control. Amenemhat III, who mastered the waters of the Fayum in life, sought to master the currents of eternity in death. He built a monument so vast and complex that the very state he ruled would be forever obligated to maintain it, tying his memory inextricably to the functioning of the kingdom itself. His labyrinth was the beating heart of this plan, a machine of stone and ritual meant to never stop. Yet, standing before the ruins today, a haunting question remains. If the system was designed to last forever, why did it fail? What force was greater than a pharaoh's eternal decree? A monument designed for eternity lasted only a few centuries. The labyrinth's disappearance was not a single cataclysm, but a slow, relentless unraveling, a victim of the very forces its builder sought to control. The first and most practical thief was human necessity. Following the Roman annexation of Egypt, the labyrinth became a king-sized quarry. Why expend immense effort to cut new limestone blocks when a mountain of perfectly shaped premium stone sat ready for the taking? Roman engineers, masters of pragmatic reuse, would have systematically dismantled the above-ground colonnades and walls to build their own cities, forts, and roads throughout the Fayum. The gleaming white facade of Amenemhat III's power was likely carted away to become the foundations of houses, the walls of granaries, or the paving of streets in Crocodilopolis. This process continued for generations through the Byzantine era and into the early Islamic period. Each new wave of settlers saw not a sacred labyrinth, but a convenient source of high-quality building material. The grandest stones, the granite doorways and statues, would have been among the first to go, prized for their durability and beauty. This was not vandalism in the modern sense, it was simple economics. The labyrinth's physical substance was too valuable to leave standing as a ruin. While humans took the walls, nature attacked the very ground they stood upon. The Fayum is a living landscape, and the water that gave it life also sealed the labyrinth's fate. Amenemhat III's great hydrological works were too successful. Centuries of intensive agriculture in the region led to increased irrigation, which caused the water table to rise steadily. This groundwater would have seeped into the labyrinth's famed underground chambers, flooding the sacred crocodile catacombs and storage magazines. The constant moisture would have dissolved the gypsum mortar holding the stones together, turning solid foundations into soft, unstable slurry. Furthermore, the canals that fed the fields also carried immense quantities of silt. Annual floods would have deposited layer upon layer of this rich, muddy sediment around the complex's base. Over hundreds of years, the labyrinth's lower levels were not just flooded, they were silently buried, swallowed by the fertile soil its own existence helped create. The monument was literally sinking back into the marsh it had risen from. Occasional violence from the earth itself would have accelerated the decline. Egypt sits on several active fault lines, and a major earthquake could have toppled columns that had already been weakened by water erosion and human scavenging. A single seismic event might have turned a standing colonnade into a chaotic pile of rubble, making the stone even easier for locals to haul away. By the time medieval Arab historians and travelers passed through the Fayum, the landscape told a confusing story. They wrote of a vast, strange pavement of stone chips, a plain of fragments that stretched farther than the eye could see. This was all that remained of the labyrinth's footprint, the compacted foundation bed that Flinders Petrie would later map. The towering walls, the echoing halls, the statues of gods and kings, all were gone. The labyrinth had not vanished into thin air, it had been dissolved, block by block, into the fabric of a newer Egypt, while its roots drowned in the silent, rising water. Its disappearance was so total that its very existence drifted back into the realm of legend, a phantom in the desert that only the oldest books remembered. This raises one final, compelling possibility. If the lower chambers were flooded and sealed by silt, could they still be down there, preserved in their watery tomb, waiting for someone to look in the right place? The silence that fell over the labyrinth's ruins was not an ending but a transformation. As its stones dissolved into the landscape, its memory began a long, strange journey through the centuries, morphing from a physical place into a powerful idea. Medieval Arab geographers and historians, traveling through Egypt centuries after the last Roman cart left with its load of limestone, encountered the same puzzling landscape we see today. A scholar named al-Masudi, writing in the 10th century, described the site with a mix of reverence and confusion. He spoke of a vast paved area, a plain of countless stone chambers, but he also wove in local folklore about hidden treasures and jinn guarding the ruins. The labyrinth was no longer just a building, it was becoming a story, a layered narrative where archaeological fact blended seamlessly with magical tale. This fusion ensured its survival. When the physical evidence is gone, the story adapts, finding new life in the human hunger for wonder. By the time the Renaissance dawned in Europe, a rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman texts sent a shockwave through the scholarly world. Herodotus, Pliny, and Strabo were translated and printed, their vivid descriptions of the Egyptian labyrinth landing on the desks of curious minds who had never seen a pyramid. For these European humanists, the labyrinth was not a local legend. It was a direct challenge from antiquity, a lost wonder that demanded to be found. It became an obsession, a geographical ghost that haunted the edges of known maps. Cartographers, working from these classical descriptions rather than first-hand knowledge, began to inscribe the labyrinth onto their charts of Africa, often placing it vaguely south of the Mediterranean, a symbolic placeholder for the continent's unknown interior mysteries. This was no longer just history, it was fuel for the age of exploration. The idea of a lost, impossibly complex city of stone helped drive the notion that fabulous discoveries awaited those brave enough to map the blank spaces on the globe. The labyrinth had evolved from an administrative capital into a beacon for explorers. This evolution reveals a profound truth about how mysteries endure. A fully explained, well-understood monument might be impressive, but it is a solved puzzle. The labyrinth, by vanishing so completely, became an unsolvable one. Its absence created a vacuum, and human imagination rushed in to fill it. Without a ruin to point to, the story was free to grow, to become whatever each new era needed it to be. For medieval Islamic scholars, it was a cautionary tale about the greatness of ancient civilizations that even they could not fully decipher. For Renaissance thinkers, it was a tangible link to classical wisdom, proof that the ancients had achieved wonders modern man could scarcely comprehend. The labyrinth became a symbol of impenetrable complexity itself, a shorthand for any problem or system too vast to easily understand. In a way, its physical destruction was the very thing that granted it immortality as a concept. The quest to find it was no longer just about locating rubble, it was about reclaiming a fragment of lost human genius. This enduring power of the story sets the stage for our final modern question. With all our satellites and sensors, with this legacy of obsession behind us, what happens when we return to that plane of chips not as dreamers, but as detectives armed with the most sophisticated tools in history? The controversy surrounding the radar images forced a crucial shift in the search. Today, the quest for the labyrinth has moved from the realm of sensational discovery into the meticulous, often painstaking, work of modern archaeology. While the 2008 survey ignited global headlines, the follow-up has been deliberately slower and more methodical. Current Egyptological missions in the Fayum, led by institutions like the University of Cairo in partnership with the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities, are taking a broader, more patient view. Their goal is no longer to simply find a single wonder, but to reconstruct the entire historical and environmental context in which it was built. This means that every pottery shard, every soil layer, every faded inscription from the region is now a vital piece of the puzzle. Teams are systematically surveying the area around Hawara and Fayum, not with the sole intent of finding grand walls, but to map ancient settlements, trace vanished canals, and understand how the landscape of Amenemhat III's golden age actually functioned. They use high-resolution satellite imagery to detect subtle traces of buried structures invisible from the ground, and then follow those digital clues with carefully placed test trenches. The work is less about a dramatic reveal and more about assembling a mosaic, one tiny, weathered tessera at a time. For instance, by analyzing thousands of pottery fragments scattered across the plain of chips, archaeologists can date the periods of heaviest human activity. They might find evidence of the Middle Kingdom construction phase, followed by layers of Roman-era pottery that confirm the site was reused centuries later, which could explain some of the confusing radar signatures. Each season of digging adds another data point, slowly building a three-dimensional understanding of what this place was across millennia. This contextual approach is quietly yielding profound insights. Recent studies of the region's ancient hydrology are revealing the precise engineering of Amenemhat III's waterworks, showing how canals fed not just fields, but possibly the sacred pools within the labyrinth itself. Excavations at nearby temple sites are clarifying the architectural style and religious rituals of his reign, providing a template for what might have once stood at Hawara. The search has become an exercise in deep listening, where the desert's whispers about trade routes, climate shifts, and daily life are just as important as its shouts about lost monuments. This patient science may seem less thrilling than a ground-penetrating radar revelation, but it is arguably the only path to a real answer. It builds a stable platform of evidence upon which the grand story of the labyrinth can either stand or fall. The question is no longer, is there a grid on a screen, but what does the totality of the evidence from the ground up tell us about what was here? This meticulous process honors the complexity of the past, treating the labyrinth not as a trophy to be unearthed, but as a profound historical phenomenon to be understood. And as this foundation of knowledge grows firmer, it allows us to ask a more daring question with greater confidence. If we accept that something monumental was built and then systematically erased, what does its enduring ghost, this persistent story, truly mean for us today? The power of a lost wonder is measured not just in stone, but in the stories it refuses to let die. While archaeologists sift through pottery and soil, the Egyptian labyrinth has found a vibrant second life far from the desert, in the boundless realm of popular culture. Here it is often reborn, fused with its more famous Greek cousin, the maze of the Minotaur. This blending is understandable, a kind of narrative shorthand where two ancient ideas of impenetrable complexity become one. Yet, even in this fusion, the original mystery exerts its pull. Take the blockbuster video game Assassin's Creed Origins, set in Ptolemaic Egypt. Players can explore a stunning digital reconstruction of the Fayum, and central to one questline is the Hawara Labyrinth. The game's designers clearly did their homework, drawing from Herodotus's descriptions to create a vast, sun-drenched complex of white stone courtyards and shadowy interior passages. But true to the series' speculative nature, they fill it not with bureaucratic scribes, but with hidden treasures, secretive cultists, and perilous puzzles. It is a fictional adventure, yet it introduces millions of players to the very real historical question: what was this place? The game becomes a gateway, its exciting fiction prompting players to search online for the truth behind the pixelated wonder, blurring the lines between entertainment and education in a powerful way. Beyond games, the labyrinth is a staple of documentary television and speculative literature. Countless programs frame it as one of history's great unsolved puzzles, often pairing dramatic reenactments of pharaohs and priests with sweeping aerial shots of Lake Karan. These shows, while sometimes leaning into sensationalism, serve a crucial purpose. They renew public fascination with each generation. They take the academic debate over radar anomalies and foundation chips and translate it into a visual, emotional quest. A viewer might not remember the name Amenemhat III, but they will remember the image of a massive, buried grid on a radar screen and the narrator's compelling question, could this be it? This cycle of speculation, while occasionally distorting the nuanced archaeological facts, ensures the labyrinth never fades from our collective imagination. It is constantly rediscovered, reimagined, and reintroduced to a global audience. This enduring presence across books, screens, and controllers is a profound testament. It proves that the most compelling mysteries are not those that are solved, but those that remain tantalizingly out of reach. The factual labyrinth may be a field of rubble and scholarly debate, but the cultural labyrinth is a living, evolving idea. It adapts to our modern myths, becoming a setting for digital heroes and a subject for televised detective stories. Each new interpretation, no matter how fictionalized, is a form of homage. It whispers that the ambition of a pharaoh who reshaped a landscape and built a house of 3,000 rooms was not in vain. His desire for eternal memory has achieved a strange, digital immortality he could never have conceived. The stones are gone, but the story is indestructible, endlessly rebuilt in the architecture of our imagination. And that very act of rebuilding begs a final, reflective look, not at the past, but at ourselves. This impulse to build the inscrutable is not unique to the banks of the Nile. From the deserts of the American Southwest to the jungles of Cambodia, human hands have repeatedly crafted spaces designed to confound and transform. Consider the Hopi people of the American Southwest. For centuries, they have constructed and used sacred underground chambers called kivas. Entered by descending a ladder through a single opening in the roof, the kiva is a circular, windowless space, a world apart from the world above. Its architecture is a deliberate labyrinth of the spirit. The dark, enclosed interior represents the mythological place of emergence, the womb of the earth from which the Hopi believed their ancestors climbed into this world. Rituals performed within are journeys back to that primordial source, a symbolic navigation through layers of time and belief to reaffirm the community's connection to the cosmos. The path is not marked on a floor, but mapped in ceremony, a winding spiritual passage contained within a simple, profound room. Half a world away, in the jungles of Cambodia, lies a labyrinth of an entirely different scale but a similar purpose. The temple complex of Angkor Wat, built in the 12th century, is a vast stone model of the Hindu universe. Its towering central spire represents the mythical Mount Meru, the axis of the world. Surrounding it are concentric rectangular galleries and courtyards separated by wide moats. To move from the outer wall toward the sacred center is to pass through a series of increasingly restricted and ornate spaces, crossing bridges over water that symbolizes the cosmic ocean. The layout is a mandala made walkable, a physical and spiritual maze where the very act of progression past intricate bas-reliefs depicting epic myths through narrow, echoing corridors purifies the pilgrim. The complexity of the path mirrors the complexity of the cosmology, making the architecture itself a teacher and a test. Why does this archetype appear again and again? Whether built from earth like the kiva or from sandstone like Angkor, these structures share a core function. They are machines for focused experience. A labyrinth, in its truest sense, is not about getting lost, but about being guided through a controlled disorientation. It removes the familiar, the straightforward, and forces a different kind of attention. In a defensive context, like the twisting tunnels of a medieval castle keep, this confusion protects a physical treasure. In a sacred context, it protects and reveals a spiritual one. The winding path slows the body, which stills the mind, making it receptive to revelation. The journey through the complex becomes a metaphor for the journey of life, or the soul, with its trials, choices, and ultimate goal. Seen through this global lens, the Egyptian labyrinth at Hawara transforms. It is no longer just an outlier of pharaonic ego, but a profound expression of a universal human language written in stone. Amenemhat III's 3,000 rooms were the ultimate amplification of this ancient principle. His complex fused every purpose, a defensive stronghold for state wealth, an administrative maze controlling the living, and a ritual labyrinth guiding initiates and priests through the mysteries of Sobek and the afterlife. It was designed to be the most overwhelming architectural experience on Earth, a tool to humble every visitor from provincial governor to foreign envoy and reshape their understanding of power and the divine. When Herodotus stood bewildered in its halls, he was participating in a ritual as old as humanity itself, the ritual of being deliberately, magnificently overwhelmed by a space designed to put you in your place within a grander order. His awe was not a bug in the design, it was the entire point. This comparative view begs a final, deeply personal question, one that moves us from admiring ancient blueprints to feeling their echo in our own lives. These grand comparisons reveal a pattern, but they also sharpen the specific, stubborn mysteries that still cling to the sands of Hawara. After all the texts, the surveys, and the speculation, the Egyptian labyrinth remains a constellation of brilliant, unanswered questions. The first and most fundamental puzzle is its exact location. The consensus points firmly to the area south of Amenemhat III's pyramid, that vast plain of Chip's Petrie map. The classical sources all point to the Fayum, and the radar anomalies there are undeniable. Yet, could we be looking in the right region but the wrong spot? The Fayum is large, and other sites like Mu with its colossal statue bases suggest the complex might have been a distributed ritual landscape, not a single centralized footprint. Is the true heart of the labyrinth beneath our feet at Hawara, or are we standing on just one administrative wing of a wonder that stretched for miles? This leads directly into the second enigma, its full, true extent. Herodotus gave us the staggering number of 3,000 rooms. Was this a literal count, a symbolic figure, or a traveler's overwhelmed estimate? If the labyrinth was primarily a temple complex, even a vast one, 3,000 cult chambers seems excessive. But if it was designed as the consolidated administrative capital for all of Egypt's provinces, with storage, workshops, housing, and temples, that number begins to feel more like a description of a small, walled city. Did its boundaries encompass the satellite sites around Lake Moeris? Without discovering a foundation inscription or a complete ground plan, we are left measuring a phantom. Then there is the most tantalizing question of all, the subterranean network. Herodotus was adamant about the duplicate 1,500 rooms below ground. The controversial radar scans seem to promise exactly that, a ghostly grid. But is that grid pharaonic masonry, later Roman irrigation ditches, or natural geology? If those chambers are real and could be entered, what would we find inside? The logical answers are both practical and profound. We might discover the silt-flooded catacombs of the sacred crocodiles, thousands of mummified reptiles in their pottery coffins, a direct window into the Sobek cult scale. We might find the flooded state granaries or the sealed burial vaults of the labyrinth's high priests. Or, in the deepest, most restricted chambers, we could find ritual spaces untouched since the Middle Kingdom, their walls perhaps still bearing inscriptions describing the labyrinth's own purpose and construction. That underground level is the locked vault of this mystery. Understanding what we might find there forces us to confront the fourth great puzzle, the labyrinth's primary function. Was it more religious, administrative, or funerary? The evidence suggests it was a masterful fusion of all three, a triple-layered machine. Its religious heart was the temple to Sobek, appeasing the god of the waters that fed the Fayum. Its administrative body was the bureaucratic engine that managed the region's wealth and the royal funerary cult. Its funerary soul was its connection to the pyramid, serving as the eternal mortuary temple to sustain Amenemhat III's spirit. The genius of the design was that these functions were inseparable, each propping up the other. The grain stored in its magazines funded the priests who performed the rituals that ensured the pharaoh's divine favor, which legitimized the state that collected the grain. It was a perfect closed loop of power, both earthly and eternal, all of which makes the final question so poignant, its ultimate fate. Given its systematic dismantling and the drowning of its lower levels, can we ever recover enough to understand its full glory? A complete reconstruction is impossible. The stones are scattered across 1,000 later buildings. But modern archaeology is less about rebuilding monuments and more about rebuilding understanding. A single, carefully excavated underground chamber, even one filled only with mud and crocodile coffins, would be a revelation. It would prove the scale, confirm the cult practices, and provide organic material for precise dating. We may never walk its colonnades, but we could finally hear the whispers from its buried halls. The labyrinth's greatest secret may no longer be its location, but the stunning completeness of the story that might still be preserved, not in towering stone, but in the silent, waterlogged mud below. These lingering questions create a vacuum, and human imagination abhors a vacuum. When faced with a loss as staggering as a monument of 3,000 rooms, the temptation is not just to find an answer, but to find a spectacular one. This is where the story of the labyrinth branches into the realm of fringe theory, a space populated by ancient astronauts, lost civilizations, and hidden technologies. Some propose the labyrinth was not a temple or a granary, but a colossal ancient power plant, its maze of chambers designed to harness telluric earth energies or acoustic resonance. Others weave it into the myth of Atlantis, suggesting it was a repository for the advanced knowledge of a sunken civilization, a library in stone meant to preserve secrets we can no longer comprehend. The most popular fringe narrative ties its impossible scale and precision to extraterrestrial visitors, arguing that such a feat was beyond human capability 4,000 years ago, requiring alien architects or tools. Mainstream archaeology respectfully but firmly rejects these explanations, and the reasons are rooted in evidence, not closed-mindedness. The power plant theory falters on a simple point. We have no artifacts, no wiring, no mechanisms, no textual references to anything resembling energy generation from the site, only descriptions of rituals, administration, and storage. The Atlantean connection relies on a myth recorded by Plato 2,000 years after Amenemhat III, with no tangible link to the Egyptian archaeological record. The alien hypothesis commits what scholars call the fallacy of presentism, underestimating ancient human ingenuity because we, in our modern arrogance, cannot immediately grasp how they did it. We have the quarries at Tura, we have the worker settlements at Giza, we have the engineering plans for the Fayum's waterworks. The evidence shows a clear, incremental progression of Egyptian engineering over centuries. The labyrinth represents the pinnacle of that tradition, not a sudden, inexplicable leap. To credit aliens is to discredit the breathtaking achievement of the ancient Egyptians themselves. Yet, to dismiss these fringe ideas entirely is to miss their deeper value. They are not about facts, but about feeling. They speak to a profound and very human desire. When we stand before the plain of chips at Hawara, the gap between Herodotus's glorious description and the barren reality is emotionally immense. The standard archaeological explanation, while convincing, can feel clinical, a story of bureaucracy, silt, and quarries. It explains the how, but for some, it fails to match the awe of the why. Fringe theories rush in to fill that emotional gap. They restore the wonder. They propose that the labyrinth was as mystically powerful as it felt to those ancient travelers who wrote about it. In doing so, these narratives perform a strange service. They keep the mystery alive in the public imagination, often reaching audiences that academic journals never will. They highlight our innate craving for the extraordinary when confronted by the shadows of our past. The labyrinth, in all its vanished glory, is a perfect screen upon which we project our own modern myths about lost golden ages and hidden truths. Its very absence makes it powerful, so while the stones may argue for a pharaoh's practical genius, the enduring legend reminds us that some ruins are built not just from limestone, but from our endless need for wonder. The true treasure of Hawara may not be a hidden chamber, but the search itself. This centuries-long quest for the labyrinth has done far more than scan empty deserts. It has fundamentally shaped how we uncover the past. Each generation of searchers, from Flinders Petrie with his measuring tape and notebooks to modern teams with ground-penetrating radar, has been forced to innovate. Petrie's meticulous mapping of that plain of chips established new standards for archaeological precision, proving that even rubble could tell a story if you knew how to listen. Today, the debate over those radar images pushes geophysicists to refine their tools and interpretations. teaching us to distinguish between a pharaonic wall and a Roman ditch. The labyrinth, by being so elusive, has acted as a perpetual testing ground, advancing the very science that seeks to find it. It forces a rigorous conversation between the page and the spade. We must constantly return to Herodotus and Strabo, not as infallible guides, but as human witnesses. Their accounts become puzzles to be solved, or a data point to be understood. Did Herodotus see 3,000 rooms, or did he walk through a symbolic core and extrapolate a number meant to convey overwhelming scale? The search demands we read between their lines, separating first-hand observation from cultural interpretation, making us better, more critical readers of history itself. This process creates a profound, intimate bridge across time. When you read Herodotus's breathless description and then stand on the hot, windy plain at Hawara, you are momentarily connected to his sense of wonder across 2,400 years. You are feeling the same human emotion, confronted by the same monumental ambition, even if the stones are gone. That shared awe is a kind of time travel, linking our curiosity directly to his. At its heart, then, this is not merely an archaeological dig. It is a celebration of an unbroken human impulse, the drive that sent medieval travelers to the Fayum, that filled Renaissance maps with conjectures, and that loads data into supercomputers today is identical, a relentless need to know, to solve, and to connect. The Labyrinth story is so powerful because it is unfinished. Its absence is an invitation. It reminds us that our history is not a sealed book, but a fragmented manuscript with lost pages still buried in the earth. Every survey, every trench, every debated line on a radar screen is a testament to our refusal to let those stories fade. We keep looking not just for the glory of Amenemhat III, but for the glory of our own enduring curiosity, a force that can turn a field of stone chips into a gateway to eternity. The prospect of discovery hangs over Hawara like a held breath. Suppose one day a careful excavation breaks through a sealed limestone doorway and a camera probe slips into the dark. The dust of millennia swirls in the beam of light, then settles to reveal a chamber untouched for 4,000 years. This would not be a mere addition to the archaeological record. It would be an explosion of light in a dark room, the single greatest find since the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. But where Tut's tomb was a pharaoh's private collection, the labyrinth would be a civilization's living archive. The first glimpse would likely be of countless pottery coffins, row upon row, each containing the mummified form of a sacred crocodile, a silent army of Sobek's incarnations. Their linen wrappings, perhaps still bearing traces of gold leaf and painted eyes, would tell us not just of ritual, but of the scale of devotion, the number of priests required, the economy of a god. Beyond the animal catacombs, other chambers could hold the true time capsule. Imagine a sealed administrative hall, its floor still littered with the papyrus records of the temple scribes. These would not be grand royal decrees, but the day-to-day ledger entries that make history real. Lists of grain shipments from the provinces, inventories of temple jewelry, work rotas for the priests, even private letters. This would be the Middle Kingdom caught in mid-sentence, allowing us to hear the mundane hum of the state machine that Amenemhat III built. The walls themselves might solve the central mystery, lined with intricate reliefs and hieroglyphic inscriptions that are not yet worn by centuries of wind and sand. These could be the building texts, the pharaoh's own justification for the labyrinth, naming its architects, detailing its purpose, and providing a map in stone of its legendary 3,000 rooms. We could finally read the monument's own autobiography. The global impact would be instantaneous and profound. The discovery would dominate every news cycle, not for a day, but for years. Every new fragment of papyrus, every perfectly preserved artifact would be a headline. History textbooks would require new chapters, not about wars and kings, but about the intricate workings of belief, bureaucracy, and water management in one of humanity's first superstates. Scholars would have a new Rosetta Stone for understanding the Egyptian mind, not through the lens of death like the pyramids, but through the lens of organized, functioning life. The world's museums would vie for exhibits, and the site itself would become a pilgrimage point, drawing millions to stand at the threshold of a rediscovered wonder. This hopeful speculation is not mere fantasy, it is the fuel. It is the quiet dream that powers every meticulous soil sample, every careful brushstroke in the sand. It is the belief that somewhere beneath that unassuming plain, the labyrinth is not truly gone. It is simply waiting in the perfect, silent dark for our light to find it again. The sands of the Fayum hold their silence, but the question lingers in the dry air. Does the labyrinth of Egypt still lie hidden? The sheer weight of testimony, from the stunned pen of Herodotus to the meticulous maps of Petrie, argues that something monumental was here. The ghostly grid on a radar screen, whether ancient wall or later ditch, whispers that something still is. We have the words, we have the footprint, we have the compelling, frustrating trail of clues that leads to a single, tantalizing conclusion. The earth itself, however, guards the final verdict. For now, the labyrinth remains poised between history and legend, a colossal shadow cast by the ambition of a pharaoh who sought to build his eternity in stone and bureaucracy. It stands as a powerful reminder that our maps of the past are never complete, that the desert can swallow a wonder of 3,000 rooms and yet never fully erase its echo. Our history still holds pockets of profound mystery, waiting for a shift in the sand, a new reading of an old text, or the careful stroke of an archaeologist's trowel to bring them back into the light. This search, this collective act of curiosity across centuries, is a testament in itself. Thank you for joining this exploration into one of antiquity's greatest enigmas. What do you believe is the labyrinth's ultimate, undiscovered secret? Share your theories in the comments below. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden chapters. And remember, sometimes the greatest adventure is not in the finding, but in the relentless, wondrous search for what